I wanted to come on tonight to talk about grief. And it's sort of lingering off my video from last night that I made when I shared about how my grandmother recently passed and having to clear out her space. And I was kind of sharing the details about that. But I got this book from the library. I'm not a morning person, and it's by Kris Carr. And I just cracked it open this morning just to start reading it. And the first like few pages really it it just really just got me because she was talking about how her father was dying. He was very sick, and the only thing that he can stomach was the chocolate Ensure drinks. And that really like like it just sunk into my heart because before, like when my grandmother first entered the hospital, before they put her on the ventilator, and she was still able to talk and she was with it, she didn't have an appetite either, and the only thing that she could stomach was the chocolate boost drinks. And I remember one specific evening going over and sitting with her for a couple of hours, and I was eating and she was drinking her chocolate boost. And I said, "Do you want me to bring you anything for tomorrow? And, bring you anything back up here?" And she's like, "Just bring me some chocolate boost drinks." So, of course, when I started to read the book and she talked about how her father wanted Ensure, the chocolate Ensure, I just said, what are the chances? So I didn't cry. Shockingly, I didn't cry when I read it, but it just goes to show you that you're not alone. And we've all experienced grief in different capacities for different things. And we all, there's a like, I think there's a different level of grief that we assign to different things, and we all, so for example, what I mean when I say that is some people might be experiencing the death of a loved one, or the death of a marriage, a divorce, or a best friend or a close loved one moving across the country, so there's a separation and you won't be as close physically, and so that is sort of grieving that. So we all have different scenarios and situations that we grieve. And reading this book, and again, it was just the first few pages I even got into, and I stopped and just started taking down some notes, and I thought, why not just come on and just make a quick video talking about grief, because there's so many emotions that come along with grieving something, and we can just feel like a complete mess. And so it's like the question I asked myself when I started to read the book was, what do we do when our heart is a mess? What do we do when our heart is a mess, full of grief, sadness, anger, all of these emotions, not just from the death of something or losing something, but just from trauma that's built up and things that like that's taken place in our life. And so it's like what to do. And I feel like the trauma we experience and all the things that we've never healed from can cause us to have such, just to feel like a mess in the inside, just an absolute mess. So of course, she talked about in the book how, one of the things she said was to never let, like, never, her intro, it said, if you can see it, never let them see you grieve. And immediately when I read that, I said, well, never let them see you sweat or never let them see you cry. It's because, especially, I'm a boy mom, and I think it's especially important for boys right now because generally, if we've grown up with like not so healed parents in a family dynamic, and we just weren't parented properly and raised with healthy emotional intelligence. A lot of the signaling and messages we get and we pass along through the family is like, it's not okay to show emotion or big emotion. Boys can't really cry. Uh, it's not really okay for boys to cry. They're supposed to be strong all the time. And even us as girls, as we're young girls, we even get that messaging too, depending upon who we were raised by. And so we're never quite comfortable sharing emotion. And so we suppress and then we become depressed. So then when we do begin to heal, we sort of feel just this added layer of grief for all the things that we've never grieved along the way. So it can become such a huge thing. And so, for example, like I'm a boy mom, right? And so I'm now co parenting with my son's father and doing the best we can with that dynamic, right? But, and this is just quickly, it's so important to really be careful of who you decide to have a child with and who you decide to parent with, because maybe you both come together as unhealed individuals, but when one person begins to heal and the other person is not, and there's a separation, the one parent is pretty much solo in trying to maintain a pass along some healthy traits to the child. And so as I'm healing and going through my journey here, and I can understand that I've been someone who suppressed emotion, and I was also raised with a lot of boy cousins, and it wasn't really okay for them to really cry or show emotion. That wasn't really acceptable, and it really sticks with me so much right now because a few months ago, well, a couple of weeks ago, my son came home after spending the weekend with his dad, and he said, Dad told me that, I shouldn't cry and it's not okay for boys to cry. And I was so irritated in the inside. I didn't like outwardly express that I was irritated and annoyed that his dad told him that. But I did explain to my son, and I said, and I brought him back to remember an experience that we just had a few months ago. And it was because there was a weekend that my son's dad was supposed to come get him. And so when he came to pick up my son, he was in tears. Like my son's father was absolutely in tears, and he was a mess. He was like crying in the car outside. And I went out and I said, "What's going on?" And he had explained to me that his most of his family lives in Africa. And so he had explained to me that his niece and his sister were killed. Um, in Africa, there's a lot of unrest and things like that happening, and so his 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 sister and his niece were killed, pretty tragically. Like it was really horrific, and so he was a mess. Obviously, when he came to the house and when he explained to me what was going on, and my son was looking at him just a mess, and I had to tell my son, explain to him what was kind of going on. And I just told him, like, I told my son's father, like, take care of yourself, and I'll keep him for a while you kind of process and get yourself together and things like that. And I was just giving him a hug and really just showing empathy and compassion for him during that time, because it was really like a difficult thing. And so I share that to say, he how quickly we forget. My son literally just saw his dad months prior in an absolute meltdown, crying his eyes out. And I have never seen him like that. And the it was a pretty bad situation. But for him to pass along the message of it's not okay for boys to cry, and you shouldn't really cry. I just thought, it's worth noting and saying that we need to be careful about how we try to tell people to grieve and what sort of unrealistic standards we are attempting to pass on to our children, because it's not a realistic expectation for us to tell our young boys to not cry. It's absolutely an incorrect way to try to nurture them and give them emotional intelligence. And so, I am trying to instill in my son now that, it's okay to express your emotions, and even if they're big emotions and all the things, right? But I say all that to say is that we can't really tell, we're all different, and we can't really tell another person, especially our young children, how we think they should grieve or really express themselves 100%. Like, we can't really do that and pass that along to them. So yeah, but anyway, so when I was reading the book and she was talking about never let them see you grieve, and I was thinking about, like, well, how many times it's like that messaging, like never let them see you sweat, which is like equivalent to never let people see you be vulnerable. And then it's like never let them see you cry, and it's like not it's not okay or acceptable to share emotion or how you feel about something. So it's like all these things that we were like incorrectly taught, or culture has sort of pounded in us after, so many years and things like that. But so yeah, I was reading the book, and then as I was reading it as well, I thought about how, if I'm looking down, it's because I took a couple of notes and I don't want to get off track. But I thought to myself, well, if grief is a mixture of emotions and a process that we actually have to go through, how can we come to a place where we can still, I guess my question to myself that I was asking myself tonight was, how can I grieve and feel what I feel, as well as feeling okay within myself? Like, how does that happen? And I think the remedy for me is what's seeming to work, is not forgetting about myself. And what I mean when I say that is making sure that I'm actually taking care of myself. And it's like I can still miss my grandmother and grieve some of the things that have happened to me, or all the things, right? Or whatever it is that you're grieving. But it's also, I think, is to not lose yourself in your grief for the forever. Because I think temporarily it can be a point to, like, where you don't even want to get up and get dressed, and you don't want to be around anybody. You want to sit there and eat comfort food, and it's like all the things, right? And I think it kind of comes in waves, and we all experience those kind of things. And or some people, when they are going through a difficult time, they might work out a lot, or so we all kind of process differently. But just as a woman, speaking of like how I generally dealt with like big emotions, and is maybe not have been the best way, but I understand what it is to A, be depressed and not really understand that I was actually experiencing grief during that time either. But I think the remedy that's helping me through my grieving process now, currently, is just making sure I am tapping into wellness. And that basically is just making sure that I am doing everything I can to be well to the best of my ability, whether that's going for a 15 or 30-minute walk or just getting 15 minutes of sunlight on my face and just making a little bit better food choices, all the things that we kind of intuitively don't want to do when we're going through a tough spot. Sometimes we would rather just lay in the bed and cry or just whatever, but it's about doing what I can do to make sure that I'm hitting a level of wellness and not staying in a pit for too long. And it's okay if it comes in waves, but it's about just making sure I don't forget about myself during my grieving. Um, so yeah, but this book, I'm gonna finish it, but I just thought I would come on and just share that because literally I got to like the second or third page and she was talking about the Ensure drink and I said to myself, that is exactly what and the whole thing what, her whole meltdown is because as she was in the store deciding about if she should get the 4-pack or a case, and she couldn't decide what to get for her father because she wasn't sure how long he was going to live for, like how much longer she had with him. So she didn't know how much to get. And that was when like her epiphany and her moment sort of set in. It's to like, oh, okay, like this is really happening. And that was her sort of rush of emotion. And I'm 38 now, but when I was like 36, that's when I sort of had my midlife crisis or spiritual awakening or whatever you want to call it. And I can remember just being at work an absolute shambles, like crying profusely in my cubicle at work and just an absolute despair, like an absolute despair. And I did not understand what I was exactly feeling, but it was all of the emotions. And now that I can zoom out from that, I can understand that it was grief, it's sadness and anger and just this absolute hopelessness feeling. And I say that to say because that was like the first time that I actually like cried like that in a long time, and I didn't even realize how much I needed it. But it was like for months I was doing it because I recognized that something was happening to me and I was going through something, and those were emotions I needed to feel. So it's like if you're somebody who's had to like play tough or pretend to be tough all the time and it wasn't really acceptable for you to show your feelings, or you feel like you're around people to where you can't really express your feelings, just go somewhere in your car and in your own space that brings you some measure of peace and just write and cry and do whatever you can to express yourself. And like for the young men especially, like it's okay if you cry, it's okay to have those big emotions. And if somebody tells you that it's not okay for you to cry, that's like really incorrect. So I just want to say that too, because we don't need to be passing that along. But yeah, grief. And I'll probably like make another short video and talk about as I get into the book and learn more about what she's saying. But one thing she said in here that I wanted to read was like a quick little quote. And I thought to myself, like, this is exactly what I've been feeling over the past like 6, 7 weeks and just kind of going through my process here, because sometimes we can anticipate when, like, if we have a sick loved one, we can kind of anticipate that that person might not make it, and we're preparing for our grief. But sometimes things in life hit us unexpectedly, and we have no time to prepare. It just happens, and then we are all of a sudden met with grief. So I just want to read here something she said. She says, grief cracks you open and teaches you priceless, heart expanding, and heart and healing lessons too. It certainly has done that for me. It can be used as a catalyst to take inventory of your life, figure out what matters most, figure out what matters most versus what you can let go of, and allow you to reset, breathing into the next phase of brave, courageous, and utterly unique you. So, as I shared last night, with my grandmother passing, cleaning out her apartment and all the things, right? It was a teaching moment for me. It's been a teaching moment for me because I've learned so much. Like, I've learned so much. And we don't like the things that we lose in life. We don't like the permanent losses. Not like you lose a car or something. You can always get another car. But like the death of something that's not gonna be resurrected. Like a divorce with a person, generally, if you're not remarrying that person. Like divorce, death, all these things that are like permanent, right? It is, we can't really like prepare for them a lot of times, but it's also recognizing that there's goodness in grief because you learn so much about yourself and just life and God. And you also, you understand too, like, I know for me, and not to like make this like overly religious or anything like that, but I know for me, when I was crying in my cubicle in deep despair, this was prior to my grandmother, this was like way before that, and like when I was going through my whole awakening process, and really, like, it was tough, and I was like borderline, I was like suicidal, and like the whole bit. And I'm telling you, it was at that moment to where I realized that I needed God, because only God could have helped me out of that. And as I'm still going through my process right now, and life is still happening around me, like I can't stop life from happening, it's also allowing me to recognize that I have to be dependent on God. And my whole life I had never thought like that. And so sometimes when we are experiencing life's challenges and big things that create big storms and create big emotion within us, and really alter our lives in some capacity, it's also, I think, teaching us that we need to come back to God, and we need to learn to be more dependent on God, because whatever, a lot of times the suffering and experiences we go through is showing us that we've been trying to live too independently from God. And that was another hard lesson I had to learn as I'm going through my process as well. So not all the things that we feel are bad is really bad in terms of in every aspect. They do, there are some blessings in the things that we think are bad, and those lessons we can carry for the rest of our lives. That could really transform us and shape us. So when we talk about good grief, when we say like good grief, like what else, like good grief, there really is some goodness in grief. So if you're going through something right now, if you're grieving something, a loss of something, or whatever it is, one thing that's helped me is to just don't forget about myself in the process, and actively work on your well being, being well, and the best that you can do. So, Yeah, I just thought I would share that. Thank you so much for listening.